preparing for this, and we talked last time, and the thing that when I was recording on your podcast that really came across from you was that you're very, and obviously this is your entire sense of person, right? Is you're very energetic, you're very spiritual, you can feel it. It's not just that you say it, you can actually feel the energy, right?
Nice. Thank you.
And what was interesting when I was reading about you and your past and sort of like your life is you talked about how you weren't always like that, you didn't always feel this way, that there was a time in your life where you were depressed, you were unhappy, you were not in a good space.
Hmm.
And at that time, I'm curious, did you have any inkling when you were like at that space in your life and you weren't feeling great? Did you have any inkling that you may be highly sensitive or spiritually gifted in any way?
I did know that I was spiritually gifted even as a child, and I kind of consciously shut it down after my dad died. So pain and trauma of emotion, emotional upheaval there, and disconnection from God played a big part in that for me. And so it wasn't until my teenage years I started to read tarot with a friend of mine, and then I just noticed that I picked it up very quickly and picked up the concepts, and I was like, wow, this it just lit me up, this
Hmm.
understanding this spiritual realm of life. And when we started doing psychic development classes, I caught on right away. So even during my deepest depression,
Yeah.
I knew it was there, but it was like I was split. I had the wise part of myself and then the very lost soul part of myself. So the healing process and awakening process was kind of bringing those two together.
So you were like two totally different people. You've got your like earthly, not feeling great,
Hmm.
and then you've got your like higher self, which is there, but like how do I connect with you?
Yeah, in meditations, that was it. It was like, oh, well, I'll get, kind of have a spiritual high in a meditation or in a moment in a reading, like, aha, I see it all, and then go right back into life and not really know, I didn't really know how to integrate it in a world that didn't think that way. I think
Oh,
that, empowering that understanding in a world that doesn't support it is the biggest challenge for those who are very intuitive.
amen, amen. And actually, that's so I want to go back to I want to talk a lot about that because I think that's really a key element for so many people. Is so you talked about how do I prioritize this in a world that doesn't actually doesn't prioritize it yourself. So it's almost like, and when I was younger, I don't know if you remember this, but Shirley MacLaine was like totally the woo queen of like my youth, right? And your youth too, right? So like, and it would be a thing that people would tease you about, be like, oh my God, you're all Shirley MacLaine. And you're like, oh my God, I can't be that. Like anything but that. And now I'm like so Shirley MacLaine. I'm like, I will dive into the shirt. Like it's like I will do the whole thing.
Yeah.
But the world doesn't prioritize that. So, and you mentioned that you knew this. And so I'm curious because in my experience, almost everyone that either is a listener of mine or is in my sphere of influence is in some way gifted. They're highly sensitive, they're spiritual. That's just sort of happened that way. I tend to attract that crew of people. However, very rarely do they accept that this is actually the case, right? Most of them are in a space where they're in denial because
Mhm.
they don't want to feel foolish or silly or whatever,
Mhm.
or they're depressed and miserable and can't have that connection. So there may be an element of, oh, I don't have that, or that doesn't exist, or because I was at a space in my life where I was like, I rejected everything because I was like, no, I am full science, there is none of this. But like I like the thing is I always kind of knew. So my question for you is this: so for anybody who's listening, how do they know if they're how do they know, like, how do you know if you're highly sensitive or if you're spiritually attuned? Like, what are your indicators?
Well, I'll start by saying I believe all of us have access to that part of ourselves, and that's we could go down a whole rabbit hole talking about the chakra system as a spiritual system that all of us have.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about activation of the chakras or how balanced they are. A lot of people walk around only activated from, the stomach down, the solar plexus down, those lower chakras. Not even their heart is open. So
Mm-hmm.
when you are highly sensitive, you tend to find comfort in the upper chakras, which is more in spaces of thought and imagination and connecting with spiritual experiences or wondering about things. Um, and what will happen is the mind, our intellect, which is the mind part of the ego, will deny that because, deny those experiences because it's afraid it's not going to fit into the rest of the world. The rest of the
Hmm.
world doesn't recognize it, and often puts it down. If a lot of people are in families, I was in one, where certain people in my family put me down for it, or called me weird, and things like that. So it's like, oh, that's the weirdest part of me. I got to put it away and not show it to
Hmm.
anybody. And why can't I not be that way? But yet I can't relate to people around me. And the reason why I started with that kind of knowledge and belief, I guess, for me, that we all have it, is because a lot of us walk around feeling that social anxiety or that separation from others. And I think the difference, if we were to relate more to that part of ourselves as something we were taught or enculturated or in our families, we might connect with each other better, because we can see our oneness and our sameness when
Hmm.
we're in that spiritual sensitivity and awareness, more than we can in the survival mode of like the lower,
Yeah.
concerns of human life.
That, it's so interesting you talked about the survival mode, because like that was where I was in survival mode for a really, I mean, most of us are. And there was a moment about 5 or 6 years ago where I realized, I was like, oh my God, like I'm literally just barely staying alive. And like, do I really want to live like this? And I decided no. And so I was like, well, okay, I got to do everything different, right? Everything that I'm doing, I got to do everything different. And that was part of it, was getting out of that. Like, there's a lot of intention involved in stepping out of survival mode, because it's such a visceral thing, because you're literally trying to stay alive. Your body's trying to keep you alive. It will literally do everything it can to keep you from stepping out of that space. So it makes sense, I guess, that we would struggle with it. So, but like, this brings me to you mentioned something there where we all have this connection, right? So we all do have this connection, but in my experience, there's people whose connections are deeper, they're louder, maybe they're
Mhm.
more. And I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why is that. And sometimes, some cases, like it's just like people don't do the practices that are necessary. In some cases, maybe their soul is on a different journey, different space. But my one of my guides said to me, their journey is not your problem. Focus on your journey. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I'll do that. But my question for you is not related to that as much as it's related to, everybody wants to be like the chosen one, right? So like I'm the Luke Skywalker. I'm the One Ring. I'm the Hobbit. This kind of thing, right? And when we're kids, we read all these stories about the chosen ones. And for highly sensitive people, like who you mentioned spend a lot of time up here, there's a lot of imagination that probably ends up getting spent in that space of creating fantasy worlds and stuff like that, right? At the same time, we are taught, especially if you're socialized as a woman, to keep yourself small. Don't make yourself seem too big. Don't get too big for your britches. I can hear my grandmother's voice in my head, right?
Mhm.
And do you think there's an element of people denying this part of themselves because they don't want to feel like they're all that, like, oh my God, like those two things are in conflict with each other?
That's a wonderful question. Yes, absolutely. And I want to just back up, because I don't think I fully answered your question of like, how do you know you're sensitive? Like, yes, these are the qualities, but also like that sense that you understand reality at a different level, right? And you can kind of see through the mask, the illusions. You can feel energy, and there's a truth in that. So that kind of stuff, I just want to validate anyone out there that's wondering, like, is that it? It's like, yes. And then oversensitivity to crowds and loud noises, sensitivity to certain kinds of music and TV, all of that stuff can lead towards that. But yes, with women especially, and or anyone who is, I mean, again, we all have a balance of feminine and masculine energy, but anyone who is feminine leading, oftentimes their superpower is in their intuition. That's not a scientific statement, so nobody send me angry letters. But
I think it's
just
very scientific. I subscribe to that.
okay, good. Thank you. But yeah, and that's where you have in indigenous cultures, you have two spirit, right? The two spirit people that had both feminine and masculine qualities, or feminine leading men, or
Have they
masculine.
still there's I have
Still,
followed so many two-spirit people. Yep.
right. Yeah. So it's there, and they tend to have a greater understanding of that mystical space. They tend to go into the more shamanic arts. Not always, but that's something that's common.
Hmm.
So to me, there's power in that balance, but also the feminine element is the woo. It's like that is our essential superpower. So yes, when you're enculturated to grow up and be polite and smile at parties and make everybody comfortable In the meantime, you're like, I see through all these illusions and I don't know what to do about it because none of this is true or real, and it'll make you feel crazy. So
Hmm.
some people get really good at pushing that down. In my opinion, that causes a lot of illness, stress, anxiety, mental illness, all kinds of problems when we have to deny our reality over and over and over again and create like something to make it work within us,
Hmm.
that just doesn't, that's not true. But the intuitive element, the spiritual giftedness that we have, that is our truth, and that is our deep most essential nature. So when it's not allowed to be expressed, yeah, it doesn't feel so good. But I think that nature is on the rise, or that respect is coming back. You know,
Hmm.
it was squashed down with the Inquisition, with the witch trials, with the, well, the witch trials or something else, but anyway, the witch burnings, you know,
Well, I
like.
think collectively all of these things came together. Like it's all,
Mhm.
the witch trials are all, everything's all a part of it, right? Because
Yeah.
anything that was outside of what was touchable by the patriarchy, what they could access, was somehow evil, bad, what have you. So like it all adds up. Death by a thousand cuts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's well, my guides years ago, since we're mentioning our guides in this conversation, I asked, because I'm still very intellectual as much as I am spiritual.
Hmm.
So I ask a lot of freaking questions, and especially when I was downloading all of my instructions and my calling, probably 15 years ago, still continue to today, but it was like the big vision started coming to me.
Hmm.
My guides told me that, there are basically reality splitting into two roads, and one road is the road of the mind, and the road of logic, the things you see and touch, and then there's this other road of just following the flow of energy. I say feeling with a caveat that it's not about following your emotions all the time,
Yeah.
but it's following that subtle intuitive feeling, and just literally just trusting it, like you're flowing down a river and you don't know where you're going, but you're having a great time. It's like
Yeah.
there's a lot of wisdom in that, and we can create and manifest with that as well in an interesting way.
So going back to just what you just said, I want to massage that a little bit, because you were talking about, I remember one of my earlier meditations moving when I moved to my new house, was one of my earlier meditations here was really one of my guides saying, you need to let go. I will drive this boat. Like you don't need me
Hmm.
to, you don't need to drive the boat. And it was
Hmm.
so hard for me. Like it took me like an hour to like just let go of control of trying to guide my mind, and literally letting my guides guide me. Cause I kept trying to grab the oar and be like, okay, let's
Yep.
go. Right.
Yep.
So, and now you earlier talked about how you shut down in an earlier part of your life because of trauma. You shut down your connection because for whatever triggered that, made me like, okay, now, okay, so I'm gonna put all these ideas together. So you're traumatized, you shut it down. As somebody who's traumatized, you're now a control freak because you want to control everything because you're
Yep.
traumatized. Your meditation that is necessary for you to be able to really get in touch is surrendering to someone else driving, but you can't do that because you're a control freak and you got to be driving. How does one deal with this?
That's the question, isn't it? Oh, I love that. So, yeah, for me, there are, lots of different traumas in childhood, but the big one that shut me down was the sudden death of my father. So that was an emotional trauma that was out of the blue, very sudden, not expected at all. We had moved into a new house, so there was a new school. I was going in from kindergarten to first grade, and a new school, a new place, blah, blah, blah. 2 months later, he dies of an aneurysm. And he
Oh,
was 37 years old.
so
Um,
young.
yeah, very young. And my mom and I were very different people trying to deal with the same grief, and also trying to find answer. I was trying to find answers in the religion that she was, bringing me up in. And I was the kid in the Sunday school. Well, why is this? And why is that? And what about this? And what about that? And I'm trying to reason with God.
Hmm.
Why is this happening? If I'm doing all the things I'm supposed to do and I'm a good girl, this pain is just excruciating, and I feel like an alien. I feel like I don't even belong here. So now you've taken the one person that got me.
Hmm.
And I think I just got really angry and I shut down my connection. And that's something I actually teach in my intuitive development program. One of the first steps we do is reconnect with your idea of a higher power.
Yeah.
Because while, it doesn't have to be like what's written in the books, the big man in the sky, it doesn't have to be anything anyone else has defined, but your experience of that source energy or that higher energy flowing through all things is really imperative to forgive that part, or forgive any things that have happened, so that you can open up to reasoning with it in new ways. of saying, yeah, maybe my dad and I had a soul contract so that I would do that and then discover my intuition and my spiritual gifts. So then I empower others, because if that hadn't happened, I was kind of spoiled brat before he died. Honestly, I look back and I'm like, I was an only child. I got, all the toys in the toy store for Christmas, and then things changed. So it was very humbling. And it
Hmm.
also made me turn within. So along with other things, being bullied very badly in elementary school and lots of other kind of things, I just, I started to not trust the world, and yes, become very much a control freak in what I could control, until I realized that I didn't want to live that way either. It was like either I awaken and I listen to my guides, or I'm going to check out. And I did have a suicidal part of my life, a suicidal
Hmm.
ideation, where I was just like, no, I don't want to do this anymore. So it was really a big deal to say, okay, my spirituality is the way out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a powerful thing that you just said, because that was how it sort of started for me as well. I had to redefine what do I see as like the truth of the universe, I guess, for myself, like that source, what is that?
Mhm.
And it was hard to figure out what language to use, because like God didn't work for me, like goddess, like none of those words actually worked for me, right? And source worked the best, because it's kind of like amorphous, but it like gets the point across of like what I'm trying to say is like
Mhm.
whatever it is, whatever they are, whoever it's source, that right there. But I feel like that's such a key element to, because you got to like deprogram yourself too at the same time, because like you bring in all those belief systems, right? Because you said you went to Sunday school and you had all these things and you disconnected, but like you were still programmed in that space, so you had to like, how do you deal with it when you like come upon something? And I'm sure you've been doing this for so long now, I don't even know if you like remember these times, where you do it so long, you're like, dude, that was like 10 years ago that I had that experience. But if you remember, for us, those moments where you're touching upon a truth inside, right? You're like, okay, I can feel this is the truth. And it's antithetical to something that you were taught growing up, like heaven and hell, good or bad, that kind of
Mhm.
thing. Or like defining something, let's just like defining something as good or bad, or sinful or good or bad, right?
Mhm.
And in the belief system that, the way that we view the world, it's not really about good or bad as much as it's about the experiences, and and that kind. So those are two ideas that don't kind of work together.
Mm.
So when you come upon those in your spiritual practice, how do you massage that so that you can kind of like release the other idea and absorb this new idea?
That's a good one. I because of how many questions I asked and picking apart the process, because I'll start with like, especially in the woo woo world, we take a lot of Eastern concepts and we, kind of smush them all together. And there's a lot of, eclectic ways of thinking about spirit, spirituality, source, how it all goes together. And I feel like for me, it was important to look at the concept of ego and that separation from the spiritual self, or the essential essence.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the teachings, up until the point where I started, kind of saying, okay, I want to teach this myself, but I need a new way to talk about it, because it's been talked about so many times. So what's the way that I'm going to talk about it? And I was already living this way, but I finally found a language for it, that we get our ego gets split into a mental aspect and a physical safety aspect. So the things that, so to me, I look at the ego as our survival mechanism that's old and primitive, and the judgments of the mind keep us in that control freak situation, like, oh, we know what's happening, we know what's going on, we feel safe when we kind of have the lay of the land and the parameters. And then of course the instinct to stay safe and comfortable is the part of us that won't take a big step, because we're scared of being ridiculed, or we're scared of
Mm-hmm.
losing financial stability or whatever. So we're scared, on this end, and then we're trying to control everything with our mind. So with the judgments of the mind, those are the things that talk about God. Those are the things that write books about God, unless it's like this kind of essential spiritual poetry that's just kind of flowing out. But if we're trying to reason with anything, we're using that egoic mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, when I've looked at it and as I've grown and gone through my own journey, I realize anything that I'm judging as wrong or bad, if I'm not hurting anybody, or a
Mm-hmm.
thought that I'm having that might be antithetical, like some of the things we're talking about now, we could get burned at the stake for, 300 years ago. But it's like, it doesn't really matter what we think, what we judge. To me, there's an inherent rightness and respecting all life and not
Mm-hmm.
causing harm.
Yep.
But when it comes to anything else that's free will choice, it's just it's a judgment on, well, God wouldn't like that. Well, how do we know that? If we feel like it's part of our path and it's healing in some way
Mm-hmm.
and it's loving in some way and connective, to me, and even if it's not, and yet with that, you talk about, if you go into the kink world or anything else, you can talk about BDSM in some ways.
Yeah.
Some people find healing through that, through
Oh, my
whatever they're doing.
relationship is totally BDSM, and it is very much like
Yeah.
there's a very healing emotional aspect of it that is like it's almost spiritual,
Yeah,
often for the submissive and even for the dominant.
exactly. So someone with a more traditional mindset about spirituality might look at that and go, "Whoa, that's, why would you want to be hurt or
That's
hurt somebody?"
unholy, as Sam Smith would say.
Yes. But it's the experience, it's the essential, actual present moment experience that dictates that feeling of rightness and wrongness. And everybody can feel that.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to go around killing people that feels like, yeah, this is right. Like they're like
This
dealing with some stuff in there. So like listen to that stuff and just don't kill people. Be a good person. But I just feel like, I hope that answers your question, that anything that is about judgment and assuming the mind of God is suspect to me. And
you know,
it's important to feel in alignment and make sure that alignment is there, and that's where you feel the truth.
so I think that actually is such an interesting point, because how, like, when I think back to myself, like 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when I began my journey about, I mean, obviously began it when I was born, but I, for many years, so I'm neurodivergent. And so for many years, it was my way of doing things was just not the right way. It's not the way it's done, right? Whatever it is, it wasn't the way. And so like I would fail in school. I didn't do well. I was bullied. You've got the whole night, like, we've talked like it's a thing that happens, right? So because of those things, I don't try. Well, I do now, but I didn't trust myself for many years. And I actually, what's super interesting is that I don't think I realized that for a while, that I didn't trust my own judgment, my own opinions, my own feelings, because I had been gaslit so much. Being raised by a narcissist, again, you've got like, just nonstop gaslighting, to where I'm such an expert at gaslighting myself. So good.
Mm.
So now I don't trust myself, right? So we're 5, 6 years ago, I don't trust myself. So do you think that, like, how does one go from, because like what you were talking about is trusting in your own internal compass of right or good or bad or whatever you think is, but what about if you don't trust yourself? Like, did you go to therapy? Did
Oh
you
yeah.
do, yeah, so tell me a little bit of how therapy played into this then, because I feel like as I'm talking, I'm like, I think this is therapy. Let's talk about therapy.
Sure, yeah. Let's see. So rightness and wrongness, trusting self. Well, I didn't really realize how much I didn't trust myself back in the day, because I tended toward codependent behaviors because of narcissism in my family. So I was an appeaser. I would fawn, like let
Hmm.
me, and I would use my intuition to tell what the other person needed. So if I could, bypass that. In the meantime, my ego's playing against this person and fighting and whatnot. So it was, tumultuous, difficult soul contract. But when I realized, oh, I'm actually using my intuitive ability, or it's gotten really strong, so that I can kind of make up with people or make them happy.
Hmm.
And then it got to where, as that relationship started to heal, well, it was mostly because I was continually working so hard to make them happy. So I started to notice I did that with everybody. I did that with my friends. I overgave for their birthdays, or
Hmm.
for anything. I'd go out of my way at 2 o'clock in the morning and wear myself out and spend too much money. And I started to get really resentful. And I think when, and I had done the therapy work for inner child healing a couple of years when I was about 20, 21, probably 21. And I've gone, and I seem to go back every 9, 10 years for a little touch up.
Yeah.
But just for a few sessions, like, am I good? Yeah. Okay. Let's work that out. So anytime something is there and I know it's trauma related, or there's something that's not a now response that I can't get through, I definitely seek support with that. So that's a great question. But I think noticing that I was misusing my sensitivity in that codependent way, when I was able to
Yeah.
see it clearly, then I could say, okay, that's my natural way of doing it because I've done it for so long. And I grew, I kind of developed into this dysfunctional pattern, even though it was the nice side of the pattern. I was super
Right.
nice,
But not
super
to you.
nice.
Like, it's not nice to yourself though, because like
No,
you were nice to everybody else, but like you were
yes.
suffering.
And I was a doormat and I mean, talk about dating relationships and some friend relationships, being friends with people that were bullies or being walked all over and cheated on and, just kind of, okay, well, I love you, so I'll try again, these kinds of like no sense of self or self-protection.
Mhm.
And I realized that did come because I didn't have a sense of self.
Yeah.
And so anybody, and as you know, I help intuitive and spiritually sensitive people with codependent tendencies. That's why, because I was one, and I know how rocky that road is.
Mm-hmm.
And it is about going against your own grain at a certain point. When you want that to change in your life, you have to say, okay, this my true response? And you got to slow down, you got to get quiet with yourself. I recommend even sacred solitude, even living on your own if you can for a certain amount of time, so you completely get in touch with your true essence without anybody kind of clouding that up.
Yep.
um, and then you start to realize what you really want. And if you've never realized it before, what an interesting journey that is. Oh, well, I just want to go walk in the woods today. Oh my God, it's amazing. I just started like doing little things, and I realized what I need is it's not very complicated, but when I
I
get it, I'm
know.
super fulfilled.
I
And then
was shocked when I realized what I actually needed is not a lot. And I was like, huh. I was like, I feel like I've been overcomplicating it all this time. Like my basic needs for joy are very, very, very small. Um, that is so like that is so that, the finding time to be alone part is so interesting because so many of us don't want to be alone with our own thoughts. And
Mhm.
so the way that I dealt with my gifts was I drank a lot. I drank, and like that worked for a while, and then I started to drink way too much, and then I was just like, and then I just became an asshole. So at that point, then I was just a dick. So I was like, all right, well now what do we do?
This
Um,
isn't working anymore.
yeah, no, this isn't working anymore. So I got into a big fight with my wife, and then I quit drinking the next day,
Wow, good for you.
and then I was I think this was in 2013, maybe a little bit before that. So it's been a really long time. And I've only going back to actually like I've had so 1 month last year, March, I was having a huge trauma situation in my life where I was uncovering trauma and we were working through some shit. It was like it was in the end, obviously I feel super great about the fact that we did it, but it was not a good time.
Mm.
And we increased my medication. And my increased medication made me think, oh, I can drink. It's totally fine. I'm not an alcoholic. It's good. So I started drinking again. I drank for 1 month. And while I was drinking, I didn't feel, I didn't hear, I didn't, none of my, it was all, and I was like, and then I started to freak out because I couldn't hear any of my voice. And then now, so, and it was all connected. And the reason why I'm bringing all this up is because momentum of our old bad habits of coping, they exist. And
Mhm.
we don't ever necessarily know when something's going to rear its head to like trigger us to where we can fall back into those old spaces. Now, so many of us tend to think of those moments as failures, as like, oh my God, look at me, I failed, I sucked, blah, 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 right? But so I'm curious to know when you're working with your clients and they're in that space, right? Because it's not a failure. It's all it is you're just meandering around. You're on the river. When you're on the river takes you somewhere, and sometimes it's going to take you somewhere rough. How do
Mhm.
you work with your clients, or what do you share with people who feel like I've reverted back? Look at how far back I've gone, as if like nothing that they've done. You know how it is where they feel like nothing matters. Like, how do you guide them to sort of help get them out of that space into like a more healthy space where they can get back onto the road that they want to be on?
Well, I constantly guide them back to baseline, because to me that was something very important to learn, the baseline of myself, my essential nature, which
Mm-hmm.
was how do I feel when I'm not confused, when I'm not kind of drawn into a habitual way of being that's not good for me, or in anxiety or in depression. Like there's a certain feeling you get when you're like, it's all good. I call it like the Zen zone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with education around how to listen to the intuition, and also going back to the intellect and instinct portions of the ego, we start with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also go through the chakra system and learn how the body speaks to us,
Mm-hmm.
when the intuition is trying to get us to go one way or the other, or like saying, hey, this isn't right in your life, pay attention to me. So we throw a lot of tools at it, but really the work, and it's so cool to see, because this is spiritual work. I just hold the space and their guides do the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And so as long as I can get the mind quiet, I can help them find that quietude. I know their spirit will do the work, and usually they'll come back to the next session and say, oh my God, had this aha moment, I can't believe this is happening. Right before even we talked about this started coming up for me. And it's like, that's the way it works. There's a flow that my guides are working with your guides, and they're telling me what you
Right. There's
need,
like a
what
whole
I'm here.
consortium.
It is. It's this huge network, this internet, this spiritual internet that, I just go, I got my orders. I've got what feels right to do for you right now or to speak to you about right now. And then we'll go from there. So it's really a constant quieting so that we can hear that higher voice and that connection, feel that connection.
That is so the hardest part, is quieting
Mhm.
that it's like, it's so funny because like when I sit and I get to that space, I'm like, man, this is so good. Why don't I do this more often? And then like when I'm not like, and I've actually found, I call it in the body or in my body, in my mind, like, or it's like sometimes I'll go in my body and I can tell when I'm like so in like my mind, I'm just all in here. And then like other times I feel like I'm all out there, right? But it's like,
Mhm.
it's just sort of a feeling. But why why do you think it's so hard for people to like sit down and like do the thing? Like why would you, I mean, because you've worked with a ton of people. So for like when I'm sitting here and I'm like, damn, I feel like shit. I have such a tough time. Everything sucks right now. Why is it that way? Right. And it's because I've been too in my body for the last like week, or I haven't done my, but like I'll literally look for every other reason for why it is, except, hey, maybe you should just sit down and meditate for 15 minutes. No, I can't do that. I don't have time to do that.
Uh-huh.
What can you tell me what the hell is going on in my mind? Because I know that's not true, but why? Why do I do
hmm
this?
It's that the intellect. It's the intellect that wants to be in control. It's like I look at it as our old computer programming. And so back in the day, well, it really developed around, I guess, the Age of Enlightenment, so to speak. And, after the Middle Ages and people started to, get more into writing and music and arts and history and all this stuff. And we got kind of high on our intellect. Before that, way before that, we were just, our instinct was just there, our instinct to survive. So back in the caveman days, that's the part of the ego that led, we would
Mhm.
needed to run from the saber-toothed tiger or fight off the guy next door in the cave next door or whatever. And so our ego gets confused. It says, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is my human operating system that operates this spacesuit that is the human spacesuit. And our spirits, in the meantime, are coming in going, well, these spacesuits are a little outdated and the operating system isn't really working. So that desire to feel more peace, to have more impact, to help heal others, like all of that is a very more spiritual essence desire. If someone wants kind of fame for it, then that's the ego's desire, but that's a different kind of thing. Um, but it's really getting it under control. Taming the monkey mind would be the traditional
Yeah.
way to answer that question. The monkey mind is just boing, 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 boing. It's programmed to think. That's what it does.
Yeah.
But we have to learn to think our thoughts, not let our thoughts think us. And when we're and it's like training, just like you go to the gym to train your muscles and get fit, and maybe you train your diet to get healthy. It's the same thing, but it's a spiritual training.
Like training my dog not to jump on me when I'm trying to get the thing out of
Yes.
the drawer, right? It's like
Yep.
you may feel like jumping, but don't, right? So it's like you may feel like not meditating, but do, like
Yeah. I read something really cool today. It was an email I get from a book coach. His name, well, I'll say his name, Joshua Sprague, because he's a great book coach. But he had an email today about resistance, that's the hardest part, getting started with
yeah.
something. Once you get going, it's easy. It's just the getting started. And I have noticed that too. If I'm sitting here now working from home most of the time, I hear go for a walk. You need to get your walk in. You need to get your walk in. The sunset's so pretty. Let's go right now. And I'm like, no, I got to get things done. I got to get things done. If I let 15 minutes go by, I miss that window that would
Yeah.
have been just right for me to have that moment of aha, instead of just, all right, I hear the call. I'm going to do what I feel guided to do instead of arguing with it. And it's a life. It never goes away. You can just learn to train it and turn it down.
um that is such a, this idea that like, we hear it and then we ignore it. We hear momentum is such, I believe, like one of my fundamental life beliefs is that momentum is the key to everything. Cause like, we can get caught up in the momentum of misery. We can get caught up in the momentum of happiness. You can get like whatever it is, whatever train you're on, you'll stay on.
Mhm.
But you have to pick the train you want to be on. And I find myself every so often, like I feel like, when you think about like you're talking about working out, so, or even the practices we do for our spiritual health, if we do them regularly, then the momentum is on that and
Mhm.
and you're riding high. But
Yep.
then you're like, oh, I got to take a detour today for something. And then you take a detour tomorrow for something. And then you take a detour. And then suddenly your momentum is moving in the other direction. And now it's so hard to just sit down and meditate. We were like, 6 months ago, I was doing this every morning and I didn't even notice. But now I can't get myself out of bed to do it. And I found that with the way I feel, the way I think about things is like, I am a slave to my momentum. So if I give myself a minute to stop and pause, and then just like you said, say, okay, just step back. Are we going to go for a walk or not? Even just the stepping back pulls you out of momentum. And so then
Mhm.
you're like, okay, well, I'm already moved back now, so I may as well. Like, who
Yeah.
was it that said, Scott Gies, I believe, was the one who said, was he the one who talks about like the mini habits, where he talks about just put your shoes on, right? And so you're just going to
Mhm.
do one push-up. Forget about doing 10, just say you'll do one.
Yeah.
Like once you do one, you're going to do like 5 because you've already done one, right?
Yeah,
Same as
exactly.
well.
Just for right now, and that's also like the just for today statements, and with the
Hmm.
Reiki practitioners out there, just for today I will not anger, just for today I'll do my best, just for today dot dot dot, and just for now I'm going to take that step out the door. I'll go look and see, does it weather feel nice to go for a walk? Or if I get in the car now, I'll make it to the place where I need to go do my fitness class or whatever. And remembering too that it is habits that build up that desire to keep doing these good things for
Hmm.
yourself. And I think there's something to be said in this modern world that's so busy, to integrate that spiritual workout with everything. So um, I know Eckhart Tolle talks about many meditations, like sitting in your car for just 5 minutes or 3 minutes and
Yeah.
meditating before you go into a store. Um, a long time ago, before I even heard that, I realized if I could get myself into a meditative state most of the time, like, and I tend to have a lot of time alone, so this isn't really, maybe as doable for someone with 5 kids that's always,
Right.
busy and working 40 hours a week. But there are ways that you can work it in.
Hmm.
But even in the car, like I will play singing bowls or meditation music or something that calms my energy. So when traffic happens, I don't get into
Yeah.
that ego trigger as much. And I remind my mind, like, this is where we want to be. We want to be in that Zen zone, that Om zone, and so just kind of finding ways to work that into your everyday life and eliminating certain things that kind of bring that up, whether that's your, certain things in your diet or certain things in your atmosphere, environmental, ambient music and sound, and feng shui, all of that stuff, like kind of building a life. And it doesn't have to
Hmm.
be an ascetic, perfect yogi life.
Right.
It can just be something that makes you feel good, just being in a certain room, or um, I don't know, just consistently always thinking of everything you're putting into your nervous system as medicine. Is it good or bad?
That's the key, I think, is like, so for a while back, so I had like this, I have a very disproportionate startle response to my PTSD. Is like, you can do the smallest thing and I'll just freak the fuck out, and it takes me a second to kind of like come back. And so that's a shot of adrenaline and then cortisol, right? So, and I don't like that. And I realized that, a few years ago, that I don't like the feeling of feeling like that urgency feeling, or that feeling like, oh my God, I gotta rush. That feeling of I'm rushing. And the second I say it, I can feel immediately my hackles going up. My energy immediately comes forward, right? I don't like that feeling at all. It's my back becomes prickly. Like, these are all little things that like I can feel. And for when I was at LuLaRoe, I felt it 24/7 all the time, because the entire direct sales industry is structured to constantly keep cortisol and adrenaline flowing all the time. So
Yeah.
it was, and I remember vividly realizing what was happening, like when it aha moment, and I was like, I can't have this much in my body. I don't want to ever feel, I don't want this roller coaster happening again. So what
Mhm.
I did is, to your point, I started to look at the things that made me feel that pang, and the pang I'm talking about. It's like your body gets hot, like
Mhm.
what makes me feel that pang, or what makes me feel that sense of like I'm being pulled forward faster than I can,
Yeah.
than I can do it. And then whatever that activity is, I look at that, right? And I'm like, how
Mhm.
can I make that activity go away? And eventually what I learned was about myself was that a lot of it was being created by the fact that I was sleeping into like 10, and I was And so my whole day was getting, and so I realized that if I get up at 7, then my whole day is different. Right.
Mm.
And because now I have time to do all the things that I want to, I don't feel that sense of urgency, so on. And so I was like, okay, just changing my waking up to, but then I was tired all the time. I was like, oh, I got to go to bed a little earlier. So like when I heard you talking, what I heard was like, this is a long journey and you got to pick your individual, like, you're not just going, okay, what are all the things that are creating this anxiety? And I'm going to get rid of all of them. It's you noticing one at a
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
and being like, okay, I'm going to work on this one. Like, and now 5 years later, I have a life where I almost never feel any of these things. Right. But like, it took me like, and every day was great, but it took me 5 years to get to the point where I could say that more of my time is spent not feeling anxious than is
Good.
feeling anxious, which is not was not the case.
Yeah.
That is so important. A cortisol management. So let me ask you, when you work with your clients, do you work with them on how to manage like that kind of stuff? So, cause like, it's hard to do by yourself. So do you coach them through that?
I do. It's mostly, I mean, there's quite a bit of woo in my program, so we do talk more intellectually about it, but it is going into meditation, that sense of trust, and kind of giving them again the mind like the understanding of why we don't trust
Yeah,
and what's going on in there. So when you're armed with that information on a conscious level, it's easier to redirect. So they'll start to notice
absolutely.
like, oh, is this like what you're talking about, that being pulled and your hackles going up? That's your instinct to survive.
Yep.
It's like you go into fight or flight mode and it's like, but you're sitting at a desk and you're
I
talking on the
know.
phone. Like you're not going to die. So why are we going into fight or flight mode? And I think it's questioning those kind of primordial responses, or those
Hmm.
yeah, just the older responses in our body, and saying, is that true? Is that really what's going on here? And you're right, some energy space, some spaces are full of that energy and they're high paced, and like I was working in the corporate world for a little while and said, nope, can't do this. And I used all my tools and developed a lot of them in that space of how to show up and
Yep.
not get upset at the dysfunction of the team, and the egos. Oh my gosh, the egos. And just be like, all right, so I'm working on this stuff. Other people aren't. The world not isn't necessarily working on the same thing, but I want a different view of this reality. I want it so bad that I'm willing to change the story. So
Yep.
that's what I work with a lot, is changing the story, because when we
Oh,
do that, it changes reality. And I also work with neurolinguistic programming a lot to change those
hmm.
stories that are very stuck. So if a lot of times we can just have that conversation and say, oh, there's a part of you that's feeling this way and a part that's feeling that way. Let's talk about it. Oh yeah, I get it. Bing. But some things are so buried that we have to go in and do more kind of hypnotic and meditative
Yeah.
work, to reprogram that.
That is absolutely, like, some things are very deep. Okay, so as we wrap up, so first of all, what you do is amazing. I feel like you're sort of like you're like the Gandalf to like everyone that listens to my podcast, because like so many, I know so many people who are on this journey but are looking for a guide. And I remember when I was trying to figure it out myself, dude, it was fucking impossible. Oh my God, it's impossible to figure out on your own. You think you're crazy most of the time. And it's not, I'll tell you, it took me 5 freaking years because I was literally figuring out by myself and I didn't know what I was looking for. And I doubted myself the whole way. But God, if I had you, like if I had been like, oh my God, you're a coach, can you walk me through this? It's been fucking amazing. So, to spare every listener from the 5 years or, and this is a journey, so it could take as long as it takes. However, I know that I made my journey longer by doing it myself. So my question so I know that some of them are going to want to do it on their own because that's who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Others are going to want your guidance so that they can have somebody to, it's almost like they're going into a mystical land and everybody needs a guide in the mystical land. So if somebody is like, oh my God, I don't want to do this myself. Tell me what you do. What kind of options are there for people to work with you?
Awesome. First, I want to say thank you for that high compliment that I'm Gandalf, because that's amazing. Would
You're
love to be
welcome.
Gandalf.
Well, I mean, you're Gandalf. I just called it out.
I love it. So right now, I do readings. I haven't opened up time for those right now. So I'm mostly doing just the mentorship work. So I
Mhm.
have my Empowered Wisdom School, and that is experienced as a group. I do have some private options. And the best way for people to learn more about it is to just go to my website, mollymaccartney.com. It's MOLLYMACCARTNEY.com, and sign up for a wisdom discovery session. And we'll just talk and I'll see what's up with them, if I can help them, tell them more about the program. It's very robust, and it's a 20 week or about 5 month program.
Mhm.
So I like to some people say, well, make those shorter programs and keep people coming in, but it takes some time. And even beyond that, it's going to keep changing your life as
Yeah.
you go forward. So that's a good amount of time if they're trying to transcend fears, just empowering relationships, self-doubt, trust their intuition to a new level. That's
Hmm.
something that I love to help with, and I do, making some big leaps in that 5 months.
Oh, that's amazing. And, I know that, you mentioned the smaller, shorter programs. I got to say, so I don't do coaching as much anymore because I ended up going back into corporate for a fabulous job that I'm really excited about. But one of the things, and I'm actually kind of glad I'm not in coaching anymore because I get to say things now that like I couldn't say as a coach. Now I can just fucking come out and say it. And here's what I want to say. Anyone who says I want this 3-month program and then I want to do this and then it's like, dude, that's not lifelong transformation. I was like, you've got to be able to spend time with it. You're literally trying to change programming that you had since you were like a wee tot, and you're
Mhm.
trying to step into a whole new reality, and you're trying to do it like, can you do this for me in 6 weeks? It's like, no, I can't fucking do this for you in 6 weeks. Like,
And you have to, it's a dance with life. It is a change in the programming, but you have to give life a chance to, the physical reality of like, okay, you're doing the work, so let's start showing you that. It takes divine timing and some
yep.
shifting. So in order to really see that and work with the new paradigms, yeah, it takes time for sure. And, you know, whether it's 5 years for me, I was this long, slow wake up. And that's why I love this work, because I started in my teen years, went through the kind of dark night of the soul, and really didn't feel it until I was around 30, even though I was already giving readings. The awakening to like understanding all this really didn't come to full fruition. So that's a good decade or more of work, so yes, you can shorten it up with a guide, but it is, settle in for the long haul. If you
Yeah.
want to live intuitively, it's a whole different stream. It's a whole different road. And it's, I welcome you there because it's way better. It's
You know
way
what else
better.
though? Here's what I think. Once you get like a few weeks into it, time doesn't matter anymore. Cause like I think
Mhm.
when it's like right now we're saying 5 years, 10 years, 5 months, whatever, right? But like when I think about it and I truly am in my best space, time is so not even relevant. It's not even like, it's like 5 years, it's like 10 years. It's like what I feel
Yeah,
right now is so great. And I'm sure what I feel in 5 years is gonna be great too. But like I feel so great right now. What do I care about 5 years from now? It like the time
exactly.
doesn't matter. It only matters before you start, because at that point you think time still matters, right? And then you go into that new
Mhm.
reality and you're like, oh right, time isn't really anything.
Right. You get present. You get present to yourself. And when you're present, you do realize time is a construct, just like so many other things that we have to pay attention to. But it is. I think there is a certain amount of awareness of a span of a lifetime, like how short and precious it is, but also how much can shift and change.
Mm-hmm.
And I can even kind of, I know we probably need to go soon, but like when you live the intuitive path, you can even visit your future self and ask them, what would you have me do right now?
Mm-hmm.
If I was on my deathbed, and just go there intuitively, and what is the right choice? If I'm going to look back on my life and think about, if I said yes to this, would I regret it? Or, if I didn't do this, blah, blah, blah. And you can feel the yesness in that. And to me, just the idea of creating a life that you are building so that you can look back on it and enjoy the memories, you
Yep.
get to enjoy it twice,
Yeah.
so you're not so caught up in the instant gratification or this or that or the judgments. It's like, it's not ever about that. It's about how you feel in your journey and how you feel in your experience.
Oh, yes. Oh my God. We're gonna end with that mic drop right there. Thank you, Molly, so much for joining me today. This is like so I was really excited for our conversation because I knew that like these are some really important questions that I have had and my listeners have had, my friends have had, and we've all been like, can we just sit down with somebody and ask them? And so I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to talk about it. And everyone, go to the website, sign up. Seriously, I spent an hour on a call with you for your podcast and it was like, holy shit, this is amazing. So God, imagine like what you're going to get out of 5 months. Molly, thank you so much for your time.
You're so welcome. It was great to be here today.